Watch this.
Books, bullets, and ballots. What do these three things have in common? Well, they were all talked about in the Idaho Legislature today. And we'll be talking about them too in just a minute. It's not just about the Benjamins. It's also about what Benjamin first said about a colonial militia, which would end up on a bill that bears his face. And all the others too. In God We Trust could soon end up in all Idaho schools. So yes, a lot of stuff going on at the State House. A lot of unnecessary stuff? Well, a lot of you are wondering when they might get to the important stuff like property taxes. We have some idea when and why they haven't yet. An early start at the State House this morning. At 8 a.m., the House Education Committee was off and running and settling into, well, beginning to listen to testimony for two different library bills. After 3 hours of that, they ended up with two no decisions. So let's get over to Joe. First, what is the difference between these two competing library bills, and now what?
Well, now what? It's wait and see. But really, the difference between the two library bills is one was pretty specific and went into a lot more detail. The other one a little more broad. But we'll get into this. It really is, though, wait and see. The House Education Committee held an idea in committee, and essentially they let another idea go, ending the meeting this morning, early this morning, with no vote. Now, both pieces of legislation we're talking about here would have required Idaho public schools and community libraries to take steps to restrict a child's access to material deemed, quote, obscene or harmful to minors. Now, each legislation went into definitions on what these things are: sexual conduct, obscenity, nudity, things of that nature. The first bill that lawmakers heard this morning, House Bill 139, it went into great detail. And for 2 hours, there was debate and testimony on the bill, which included a mechanism for families to bring civil actions against a school or library with a penalty of $10,000 for each instance a minor got access to harmful material. Some lawmakers expressed concerns about the idea going too far, infringing on free speech. Hours of public testimony, both for and against, ended with lawmakers voting down the idea. Some members of the public and the committee had an issue with the $10,000 penalty being too much. Now, the second piece of legislation was a more broad proposal that put a lot of control locally on what to do with libraries in schools and communities. And some lawmakers said they didn't think that the idea went far enough because, in part, legislation number 2 does not have any civil penalties included. So kind of an odd way to end the meeting as lawmakers were getting ready to vote on the second piece of legislation. A motion to end the meeting was made. So yeah, the meeting just ended. It passed, and the committee could likely see the legislation again soon. It is wait and see. But for now, the conversation is in a lull. Also in committee for you on this Wednesday, a proposal to add firing squads as a backup, alternative method of execution in Idaho. So the default right now in the gem state is lethal injection. And Idaho and many other states are having a hard time getting the drugs for lethal injection. Long story short, many manufacturers of the chemicals are no longer willing to sell for the purpose of their product being used for lethal injection. So Idaho has death row inmates, but no way to carry out the sentence of the death penalty. So this legislation we're talking about right now gives another way in Idaho, the firing squad. Some lawmakers debated, though, that this legislation may be a quick reaction to an issue that just needs more time.
One way we could do this is to wait and see if this problem that we have in terms of obtaining the drug corrects itself and maybe a supply for the drug becomes available. So I don't think, to me, that it's necessary to react in a knee-jerk way, and maybe we can look at that.
Advocates for the idea say there needs to be a replacement idea for lethal injection, or else Idaho fails to carry out death sentences that were ruled through due and complete process. A lawyer on the Idaho Attorney General staff joined testimony with Legal Insight, and he answered a major question from the committee and the public. What about using new or other drugs than the ones difficult to get right now?
We are unaware of the availability of any other drug that would allow us to complete an execution.
This is our best chance to carry out what the law tells us we must do. In part of the sentencing, a judge told us just the other night, some of us here, that retribution is one consideration that a judge must consider when doing any sentencing. That's punishment. This is the just punishment under our laws of our state.
After debate and public testimony for a while this afternoon, the proposal passed. It now heads to the full Idaho House for consideration. In committee, though, there was questions about how the firing squad will work and what process they would go through. And Representative Skog was very clear. This legislation does not dictate that. Per Idaho law, the Department of Corrections would need to be in charge of creating that process. Of note, though, the bill does include a fiscal line that says there's an estimated $750,000 one-time cost for the Department of Correction to refurbish its facility and meet safety and execution requirements to allow a firing squad. All right, let's pop up to the Senate floor. Idaho lawmakers debated something Idahoans have asked for you. Yes, you at home included, an official state voter guide sent out by the Secretary of State's office. Now, Secretary of State Phil McGrain is pushing for the idea, and he tells me it's about educating voters and getting voters the info that they continue to ask for. Some senators, though, they saw issues with the idea on a few fronts, including the existence of other voter guides, cost to taxpayers, and state involvement in the party primary system.
I believe that this is not the proper role of government, and if we have $750,000 a year to be able to spend to send out these, then we should definitely have at least $750,000 or more to give back to the taxpayers of Idaho. Thank you.
Because the fiscal note in the legislation said it would cost $750,000 a year to send everybody at home the information before the election. Now, other senators pushed back, saying that the voter guide, it's about transparency, trust, and voter education.
You've got all sorts of voter guides out there that are unofficial guides that represent the bias of that particular organization. I really think this is a way to just get out basic information to the voter, help them be better prepared when they vote, and I don't want to see us get to the point where our party primaries are so private and so controlled that we no longer publicly fund those elections.
So that proposal passed the full Idaho Senate. It now heads to the House for consideration. So good news for those of you that are asking for the service. Finally for you today on the House floor, debate on displaying the national motto in Idaho educational institutions. The national motto is, "In God We Trust." And the legislation says if and only if a private donation is made to an educational institution for the specific purpose of having a poster or a framed image of the phrase, "In God We Trust," then a school must put that up. Now, the bill sponsor said if a donation, the money needed to put up the motto, if that isn't made to an institution, if it's not there, he says, no worries about putting that motto up. But this is strictly paid for by private donations. But Minority Leader, Democrat Alana Rubel, questioned if the motto sends a message to families that practice religion or lack thereof differently.
I know in my district I have a lot of people who are not part of a monotheistic tradition, who are Hindus or Buddhists or atheists or any number of other things. They're working very hard, they're paying taxes, and I think they should be able to send their kid to a public school without having it rubbed in the kids' faces that they're different and that they're religiously, unlike the majority of kids there.
So that proposal passed the Idaho House. It now heads to the full Senate. There was basically overwhelming support for that. So pretty good chance that would end up on the governor's desk.
Even though there's some confusion as to whether it has to be donated or the school has to purchase it, there was an argument or discussion about the word must in this bill. There's still a lot of hanging chads, if it were, about this bill.
Yeah, and Representative Birch, he said, instead of saying, schools must do this, he was arguing it should say they may do this. But again, it comes down to private donations. This wouldn't be public schools going out and buying these signs for themselves.
Okay. All right. Well, as you said, could get a signature by the governor. But this bill says any public school, including the University of Idaho, must put up the motto, "In God We Trust," somewhere on campus, clearly visible, with liberty and justice for all. Wait a second, that's something else. But it also lays out how this poster or framed copy should be presented should a school put it up. You can't just get the second grade class to lay out some butcher paper in the hall and start painting the motto in some clumpy colors. It's got to have a U.S. flag or an Idaho flag or both attached to it. And the background can only be black, white, gold, or silver. And that's it. Flags, letters, background. Spells it all out. And the whole point of this, according to the bill's statement of purpose, is to, quote, affirm for students, staff, and the general public the historical and ongoing significance of our nation's motto, end quote. So I guess this would be a good time to talk about the history and significance of In God We Trust. The first reference allegedly appeared in America in 1748. In describing the Pennsylvania militia in the Pennsylvania Gazette, Benjamin Franklin wrote, motto, In God We Trust. A version of that motto made itself public again in 1814. in the fourth stanza of Francis Scott Key's poem, The Star-Spangled Banner, written during the War of 1812. And this be our motto: in God is our trust. A few years later, while America was divided in the Civil War, which many believed was brought on by America losing religion, an appeal by a Pennsylvania preacher to put the Union under the protection of the all-powerful was approved by the Treasury. And "In God We Trust" was minted on all coins. Then it wasn't. Then it was. Then it wasn't. Until 1908, when Congress ordered the motto on every piece of metal money going forward. Jump ahead to the 1950s. America is waging another war, this time a cold one against communism. Since the Soviet Union was supposed to be godless, one thing that gave us the benefit in this battle, believed America's ministers, was our belief in the Almighty. And in 1955, President Dwight D. Eisenhower makes a law to put the motto on all our money. A year later, on July 30th, 1956, 2 years after adding "Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, Ike inked a bill that made "In God We Trust" the first official motto of the United States of America. And that bill would also print the motto on every piece of our paper currency as well. The "Under God" was added to the Pledge of Allegiance 62 years after it was written for the same reason. We were in the middle of a second Red Scare, and we had to establish our moral superiority to communism. You know, some might point to this motto, "In God We Trust," as evidence we were built as a Christian nation. Others, though, might point to the first unofficial motto of these United States. Maybe you've heard of it. E pluribus unum, from many, one. That phrase was adopted as part of America's first seal in 1782. And for further evidence of this country keeping design separate of doctrine, you can see the Treaty of Tripoli in 1797 and the failed attempt to add a Christian amendment to the Constitution in 1876. A 102 years ago today, March 1st, Idaho expanded its interracial marriage ban. In 1864, when it was first made part of our territorial laws, it was a crime for a white person to marry anyone of African, Indian, or Chinese descent. Break it, and you could spend 2 years in prison. Then in 1921, Idaho's state legislature added, quote, Mongolians, Negroes, or mulattoes to the interracial marriage ban, even though the number of people in Idaho who fit that description at the time was fewer than 0.02%. So it seems Idaho has a history of racism and a history of passing unnecessary laws, which many of you have also pointed out this session, like Chuck in Meridian, who texted in to say, seems Idaho residents would like the legislature to focus on education, health, property tax, jobs, housing, those kind of things. Apparently, though, they think marching militias, silencing youth, women's health issues are more pressing. Or Lori, who asks, why can't the legislature focus on an issue that could benefit literally millions of Idahoans, although there's only 1.8 million of us here, such as property tax relief? Instead, they focus on issues that may benefit or harm a few Idahoans, like the Child Protection Act. List goes on and on. We know there are plenty of different property tax bills floating around in the legislature right now. So yeah, what about that property tax stuff? We know there are a few of those, again, around the State House. Unfortunately, they all seem to have been sunk in committee. Why is that? Well, it's politics. But House Speaker Mike Moyle says they're working toward a compromise with the Senate to bring a bill forward, and one that will hopefully sail on through. Here's Andrew Bartline.
After more than 2 decades in the state legislature, House Speaker Mike Moyle knows one thing about tax relief to always be true.
The money's coming from somewhere. Remember, it's all tied to that budget. It's all budget driven.
Which is why property tax relief has no easy solution for state lawmakers. Property taxes fund local budgets where the state has little to no involvement.
The legislature doesn't collect it, and we don't spend it. If your taxes are going up, that means the local taxing district's budget's going up.
But the people of Idaho say it's now too much. The 2023 Boise State Public Policy Survey shows more than 55% of Idahoans say their property taxes are too high. More than 40% say the state should use part of their $1 billion surplus to offset those costs.
The session is talking about property tax. We're going to try to find a solution, and I'm sure we will. But you got to remember, it's complicated.
How complicated? Well, Speaker Moyle says it's narrowed down to a few bills, and each bill aims to lessen the property tax burden, but in a different way. The first is House Bill 77, proposed by Senator Scott Grow. The bill would subsidize property taxes for homeowners who live in their own home with 4.5% of the state's sales tax revenue. The second is House Bill 78. It's proposed by Representative Bruce Skog. Skog aims to index the maximum homeowners exemption. It means the hotter the housing market, the more property value homeowners can exempt from taxes. But Speaker Moyle has concerns about both of these bills.
When you start picking winners and losers is where I start having problems. In my opinion, it should be fair for everybody. It shouldn't be just couched to certain groups. The other two bills are couched to certain tax-paying groups.
The money to fund this budget still needs to come from somewhere. So does that shift to income and sales tax?
Well, exactly. If you raise the homeowners exemption, you haven't done anything on the budget, so it shifts. So if you're in a district that's got a lot of ag or commercial to shift it to, you're probably okay. But if you're in a district like a Star, for example, or a Middleton, where there's not a whole lot of commercial or ag to shift it to, guess what? You're paying it.
Speaker Moyle co-sponsors a third option, House Bill 79, alongside House Tax and Revenue Committee Chair, Representative Jason Monks.
We call it the MM bill, but the MM bill has more stuff in it to address not just homeowners, but everybody else. So we're trying to touch all the bases.
The bill would distribute $300 million to Idaho school districts based on attendance. The money is to pay off local bonds, levies, and save for future needs. The bill also increases the maximum homeowners exemption cap.
Everybody in this valley probably has a supplemental on their property tax bill. Monks's bill will pay those down or off depending on how much you have and provide property tax for everybody.
But does everybody deserve property tax relief? This graph from the Canyon County Assessor's Office shows the burden of property taxes shifting onto residents over the past 5 years. So why not shift that burden right back on corporations?
Corporations are animals that make money. If I raise your taxes, you're going to raise your costs. You're going to pass those costs on to the consumer. It's stupid. Why not do it right the first time and treat everybody the same? Why would we have tax policy that picks winners and losers?
Speaker Moyle says this is politics where some players are sticking to their guns, sort of a my way or the highway type of attitude. And we know the House Tax and Rev Committee printed all three of these bills we talked about on the same day in early February. But since Senator Grow has worked in the Senate to introduce two separate bills himself, and they're all cut from the same cloth, Brian, taking some dollars from state sales tax to subsidize some of those property taxes. And again, Moyle says he thinks that plays favorites. He'd like to see something that encompasses all property and helps people that way.
Okay, so all property, I mean, we talked about this. What does that exactly mean?
Well, you think about like a renter, right? If you do the homeowner's exemption, that really doesn't do anything to the renter because their landlord doesn't qualify for that homeowner's exemption.
Right.
So that doesn't stop their rent from increasing along with maybe property tax increases.
Okay.
If you pay off the local school levies and bonds with state dollars, according to Moyle, well, that should help that person who's renting the property. That should trickle down to the renter.
Should trickle down.
Moyle's words were if they're doing the right thing, hopefully it would stop rent from increasing. Of course, landlord by landlord, they would make their own decision.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Andrew. Nearly 2 years ago, we did a story out in Murphy, the county seat of Hawaii County. And at one time, it was considered the smallest county seat in the country. Well, they also have another claim to fame, one we were focusing on when we were out there. Out in front of the county courthouse is planted the only parking meter in Oahe County, one which has stood sentry for nearly 7 decades. And despite the fact there's parking space aplenty out there. So why is there metered parking in Murphy?
Why not? Good question.
I always assumed it was a joke.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's
Nick Eiley knows.
folklore, I guess you'd call it.
It's a story that predates his appointment as county clerk.
Yes, that happened 1956.
And apparently, the parking meter was put in by his predecessor, Kenneth Downing, in 1953.
Supposedly, he put it up so that he'd always have a place to park.
So, in a town of little more than 24 people at that time, parking was really at a premium?
Well, just one of those things.
And the parking meter, I heard, came out of the Nampa dump. They went up there and they found it sitting there and they brought it down and stuck it right here.
And after all these years...
And look how much it is, 10 pennies or 2 nickels.
It's probably pulled in a pretty penny or two for the county.
That's a really good deal for parking out here, yeah.
I wonder how much money...
None.
What?
Never did work very good, no.
I think I heard one time they pulled maybe $10 out of it.
People came there and they'll try to put money in it, but it never did work.
Well, it does now. Eric Scarsvo there, the director of the Hawaii County Historical Museum, made it his pet project. And about a year ago, he got all the pins and the dials replaced and got it working. And apparently, it's now enforced out in Hawaii County, out there in Murphy. It's also pretty affordable. You look at the sign there, 2 nickels will get you 2 hours. That's pretty good. And last week, 1 year after being reinstalled, the only parking meter in Hawaii County pulled in $8.09, which is enough for a venti salted caramel mocha frappuccino thing at Starbucks. Maybe a cheese Danish to throw in, which they also do not have in Murphy, Starbucks. But they do have a museum, which is where that money that they raised with that parking meter will actually go. All right, just to recap, we've got a lot of text messages talking about the legislature not talking about things that they want them to talk about, like this one. Says, please stop wasting time on solutions in search of a problem and get to work on property tax relief. We just got informed, our mortgage company, that our monthly payment is increasing by $100 a month because of rising property taxes on our owner-occupied home. Help. Other people suggesting, well, you know what? The relief comes from growth. Make growth pay for growth. Firing squad, what about the electric chair, says Scott. We've got a couple other suggestions as well. Why does the House committee just impose hanging? It's just as cruel as a firing squad, only cheaper. Good grief, barbaric behavior to say the least, says Linda. And then this one was interesting. They can't find drugs to kill people. You just ran a PSA about fentanyl. Well, Pat, that actually was brought up. And the AG lawyer said fentanyl is actually too dangerous. And the people who would be administering this, well, they're afraid they would be impacted by that. They don't want to work around fentanyl. So, yeah, that actually was brought up as an idea. As callous as it sounds, there's your answer right there. So, yeah, I don't know how far that's going to go, but we'll see how it all plays out. We'll see you back here tomorrow.